All right, it says we are live. So, welcome everybody. Appreciate you coming out tonight on this awesome Tuesday evening and joining Donnie and I for a little elk and elk hunting Q&A. Before we get rolling, just a couple things real quickly here because I want to save a bunch of time for a bunch of questions if we can. But for those who are joining us for the first time, thanks for being here. This is our first time doing a YouTube live Q&A that's open for the general public. So we're excited to have everybody here. We've done a couple over the past few weeks for members of the University of Elk Hunting online course, but we're excited to bring everybody in on this one. Don't forget, we've got the big Ultimate Elk Hunt giveaway that's going on with Mountain Ops right now. You can just go to elk101.com/hunt and sign up to win that. It's an all expense paid, incredible elk hunting opportunity in the state of Utah. I'm going to be there. If Donnie is up for it, he's going to be there. We'll ask him that question in a minute. And Casey Harbertson from Mountain Ops is going to be an incredible, incredible hunt. So all you got to do is just go to elk101.com/hunt and sign up for that. And for those of you that are online course members, you know you've got extra chances. For anybody that's not, you can sign up for the University of Elk Hunting online course and get 20 extra chances in that giveaway. So this week also you can use the promo code CROSS20, that's CROSS20, and you'll also have a chance to win the new SIG Cross rifle topped with an awesome Vortex rifle scope. So what else we got real quickly here? Oh, the new college scholarship program. Elk 101 super excited to launch that in June, and the deadline to apply for those scholarships is June 30th. That is for University of Elk Hunting online course members and their children. I'll just tell you right now, if you have a son or a daughter who graduated high school in 2020 and is going to college at an accredited university, this fall, we have very, very few applicants, and we are giving out $2,500 in college scholarships. So if you have a son or a daughter that just graduated and is going to college and you are a member of the online course, make sure and fill out that application. Father's Day is coming up on Sunday. Happy early Father's Day to all the mentors and brothers and grandfathers and fathers and anyone who has a positive influence in the lives of our youth. Happy Father's Day. To celebrate, we are giving away 2 bows. So Prime Archery has just been incredible for us this summer. They've given us 10 bows to give away to University of Elk Hunting online course members, and we've got 2 bows to give away this week for Father's Day. And all you have to do to enter is go to elk101.com/dad, fill in your name and email address, and we will be picking the winner on Sunday. You're going to get a Prime Synergy bow, as well as a Quest Thrive bow, which is a youth bow. So kind of a father-son, father-daughter combo. They're super excited for that. And all you have to do is just go to elk101.com/dad. Let's see, giveaways. Besides the bows, we've got more giveaways tonight. And those who have done this before or been to a seminar that we've done, you know we like to give away gear. So I've got more bugle tubes with the Sitka covers, more diaphragm elk calls, got a 3-pack here, got a temptress call. What else we got? Oh, the new hats. If you haven't ordered your new hat from Elk 101 yet, we've got 2 brand new awesome hats. You can go to elk101store.com to order those. And we've got new t-shirts coming. I'll maybe tease those here in a little bit and show you the design. Those are actually going to be available this week. And look what I found. I've got a tub of the sold out Mountain Ops Ignite in Bugleberry. So we'll be giving that away tonight. And again, just go to elk101.com/dad, fill out the form there, and that's how we will pick the winners of all of this gear plus the bows. So I think that's all I need to talk about from my end. So let's get to some questions. Donnie, are you here?
I think I'm
here. Donnie's not here, but he's tuning in on the phone with us. So he's going to go through some of the questions and kind of moderate those, read those out to me, because I'm having troubles just watching the questions scroll by here. So Donnie's going to go through those questions, pull out some good ones. If your question doesn't get read, take it up with Donnie. So you have a dad joke to start us out, Donnie?
Oh my gosh, right out of the gate.
Putting him on the spot.
Well, I tell dad jokes all the time, but I don't even have any kids that live with me. I guess I'm a faux
pas. Kicking it off just like that. All right. Do you have an elk hunting question for us?
I do. It came through a little while ago from Jacob Anderson, and we've experienced this a few times. It says, how would you hunt an area that has sheep herder around the area knowing that the elk are there? Do the sheep affect elk very much?
Yeah. All right. So let's kick it off. That was Jacob, did you say, was asked the question?
Yeah. Jacob Anderson.
Jacob Anderson. All right, Jacob. So we have actually some of the areas we hunt, especially here in Idaho. I know in Colorado it's an issue. Montana's got it. There's probably other states too, but I've noticed them in those states, and that is sheep. And how do sheep affect elk? In my experience, sheep are, we call them land maggots, and it's, I know there are sheep herders and ranchers that make their living off of it, and not taking anything away from that, but they're land maggots because they eat everything. They eat the grasses right down to the dirt. And really what we've found is elk don't compete for that feed. There's no feed left, and the elk will move out of those areas. The other thing is sheep stink. You get 3,000 sheep moving through an area, and I think it really limits an elk's ability to use its nose because everything smells like sheep. And the other thing is sheep are loud, and it limits the elk's ability to use their ears and protect them with their sense of hearing. So our experience hasn't been good in areas where there are sheep. In fact, we very rarely get into any elk. Now, with that being said, if the elk are there in the summer, the sheep come through and they push the elk out, sometimes it'll actually concentrate the elk over the ridge or into the next drainage away from where the sheep are. So it's not like they completely disappear. And sometimes what we found is we actually get into pockets where there seems to be more elk than normal. So great question, and stay away from the sheep. All right, Donnie, what do we got next?
Josh Chestnut says, before hitting a new area, how many spots do you try to have picked out on your e-scouting, and how long do you give each area before moving to a new one?
Love that question, Josh. So I typically try to have a lot of areas picked out through e-scouting. So if I'm going on an 8-day hunt somewhere, I've got at least 8 areas picked out from e-scouting. So there's one for every day if I need it. And that kind of answers the second part of the question, which is how long do I stay in an area? If I'm not finding elk, I have a hard time staying there through the morning hunt. A lot of time, we get into an area, we hike in, we get in 3 or 4 miles. If we aren't getting bugles or we aren't seeing super fresh sign and getting a good sense that there's a lot of elk in here and it could be good hunting, we just aren't hearing them for whatever reason that morning, we might stick it out. But if we aren't seeing that sign or aren't hearing the bugles, a lot of times we're packing up by 10, 11 in the morning, going back to the trailhead, getting in the truck and going to plan B, then on to plan C just the same way. So it's not at all uncommon to hit 2 different areas in one day, a morning hunt somewhere, an evening hunt somewhere, and then go to a completely new area the next morning if we aren't getting into elk. So great question.
All right, next one. Chris Houston says, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself as a new elk hunter going on their first ever hunt?
Great question. So I actually did a podcast, I think it's coming out this week or next week, with Jim Huntsman from the Western Huntsman podcast. And he asked almost that exact same question. Pretend I know everything I know now, but I'm a brand new hunter going hunting for the first time. How does that change? So the question is, what would I go back in time and tell myself as a brand new elk hunter with what I know now? It's a tough one because there's so many things that are learned along the way. There's so many important things. If you've listened to me talk about elk hunting at all, thermals have come up in that conversation, and I believe thermals are probably the most important thing to understand because it's the number one thing elk use to stay alive. So an understanding of thermals and wind is important. I would probably bring that up if I went back in time and talk to myself way back then. Another thing would be hunting with a partner. I spent probably 8 or 9 years trying to kill an elk with a bow by myself, and it's tough. And once I got a good hunting partner, it really not only accelerated the learning curve and accelerated the success, but it just increased the efficiency so much just right out of the gate. So calling elk's tough. If you have a partner so you can have a caller back behind, it really maximizes your chances. Understanding the wind, seeing how to approach and how to set up on an elk is going to be critical. So those are two of the things that come to mind right off. I'm sure if I sat here long enough, there'd be a lot more that come to mind. But as we look back over now 30, 35, 36 years of elk hunting, there's been a lot of failures and a lot of things that were painful and things that would be nice to go back and tell my young self. But at the same time, those lessons have been invaluable and have no doubt those failures have contributed to the success that we have today. All right.
All right, this one, I've had this question a lot too, the difference on some of the reeds that are available. Daniel Lucci says, can you explain the difference between the orange, green, and white Elk 101 calls? It seems like you prefer the green based on the online course.
Yeah, so great question on diaphragm calls, and I'm going to show you. Just keep in mind these are some prototype calls we're working on, and hopefully Kurt at Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is okay with me showing them. These are not what they're going to look like. These are just some samples that we've gotten. But I've got the white, the green, and the orange here. So the orange is the champ, the green is the all-star, the white is the contender. And they're all built on the same frame, but they're all built for different purposes. And I'll start with the champ. The champ is probably my favorite call overall. It's the easiest one to use. It lasts a long time. It doesn't last quite as long as these other two because they have a little thicker latex, different stretches on it. But the champ, if you're looking for a brand new diaphragm to put in and learn to call on, it's probably going to be the easiest. You can make sounds with it really easy. Coincidentally, it's one that I've used the last 2 years at the World Elk Calling Championships. And you would think that with a simple beginner type diaphragm that it wouldn't be able to do all the things that a diaphragm needs to do, but it absolutely does. So it makes really soft, sweet cow calls. It still screams a great bugle, but 7-8 days on this thing, screaming with elk every day, the latex is going to stretch and it's going to get a little too light to hit the high notes on the bugle. But I'll just demonstrate it real quick here. So cow call. And then a bugle. So again, really easy to use and has great range of sound. It's my go-to just because, you get up in the morning, hiking out of breath, it's the easiest one to operate under any circumstance. Next one's the All-Star. Again, same frame, same concept. It's just got a little thicker latex, little tighter stretch, which makes it a little more difficult to get that full range, especially on those soft, sweet cow sounds. You've got to put a little more tongue pressure, a little more air pressure into it so you don't have quite as much versatility. With that being said, this is probably the best one for all around sound. And that, you might lose a little bit on the cow call, but you gain it in the bugle and it's going to last a long time. This is probably the one that I'd recommend for somebody who's been using a diaphragm for a year or two. And especially if you blow a little bit harder, This is a great one. And you'll hear the difference in the sound. The cow call just isn't quite as soft, quite as sweet, but it still sounds good. But then the bugle, you can really get into the bugle and hold that high, clear note really well. So again, you get a lot more volume with that as well because of that tighter stretched, a little bit heavier latex. And the last one from the Elk 101 series is the Contender. This is the one that we spent a lot of time dialing in the latex. We were looking for a latex that was versatile, that was going to last a long time, but still was fairly easy to use. If you're a brand new elk collar, I'd probably not suggest this one to start with, just because it does take a little more controlled tongue pressure, a little more controlled air pressure. But if you've been using one for a while, especially if you like a double reed latex, which I don't recommend for elk calling, just because you do lose some of the control, some of the range. But if you do like to blow a little harder on the latex, this is the thickest latex that we have, and it's got a good stretch that still allows you to make those cow calls and bugle. So here's what it sounds like. And that's the one that you want to make sure that you are in front of your hunting partner when you use it, because it is loud. You can really get some air into that, really project it out there with a lot of volume. So great question. Hopefully that answers your question. The diaphragms are sold in a 3-pack. So all three of them come together in a 3-pack on the Elk 101 store. It's almost like buying two and getting one free. I think it's like $18 or $19 for 3 diaphragms if you buy it in a 3-pack. So if you want to try all three of them or just want a good range of diaphragm calls, that's a good option there for sure. All right, Donnie, what do we got next?
So this one just came through and it's fairly easy to answer, but Will Glass says, what is the distance an elk can hear you when you do a location bugle?
Yeah, so Will, great question. How far can a bull elk hear you when you do a location bugle? And it really depends. And that, the terrain, the area you're hunting, if the bull is straight across from you, line of sight, I've had bulls bugle at me at over a mile away. But I've also had elk that I didn't hear bugle and they didn't hear me bugle that were 300 yards away. So I think, realistically, if you get into a basin and you can see across that basin and see the ridges, anything within line of sight should be able to hear you and you should be able to hear it. If you get out there, 800 yards and there's a ridge and that bull, the ridge is here and the bull is on the back side of the ridge from you, my guess is he can probably hear you better than you can hear him. So he might hear you and respond and you might not hear him. Just because their hearing is so much better than ours. But it really, you get out in some of that wide open flatland like New Mexico, Arizona, you'll hear a bugle and you'll be glassing a hillside a half mile in front of you saying, it's got to be right there. And then you'll glass down in the flat a mile away and there's a bull out there and, you'll hear a bugle, you'll look through the binoculars and actually see him raise his head, mouth open, come back down. And like 4 seconds later, you'll hear the bugle. And so it's, you can hear from a long ways away. But again, when we hunt Roosevelt elk over in Oregon, it's really thick vegetation, a lot of really cut up ridges and draws. And sometimes 200-300 yards away, you might not be able to hear a bull bugle, especially if they let out a pretty quiet little bugle. So it's really hard to say, but hopefully in a nutshell, that kind of helps understand. Basically, if you can see the hillside across from you, and it's within a mile, you should be able to hear an elk bugle if he's going to respond there. Good question, Will.
And another call-in question from Hogan Petrie. How long do you try to call before assuming the elk aren't talking and head off to spot and stalk?
So that's a loaded question. How long do you give the elk before you just assume they aren't talking and you decide to spot and stalk? If you're smart, you'll do it a lot faster than I do. I hunted with Randy in New Mexico a couple years ago, and I think we hunted 7 days there. I killed my bull on the last evening of the last day, and that morning was the first time we had switched gears to spot and stalk. Up until then, the first 6 days, I think we had called in two bulls, maybe three, and they weren't real great call ins. It wasn't like we had great opportunity. It was just hot. It was dry. It was full moon. There were a lot of hunters. It was all the things that make calling tough. But still, we're in New Mexico. We were in a good unit. It was the last week of September. It should have been better, and it just wasn't. And I think Randy had put a little pressure on me and said, if anybody can call in an elk in here, you can. And so I was hoping to be able to prove him right. But in the end, we resorted to spot and stalk, and fortunately had an opportunity and made good on it on that last evening. But I think realistically, if I get to a ridge and I let out a bugle and something doesn't answer me, I'll let out another location bugle. If it doesn't answer me, within a minute and a half, 2 minutes, we're usually hiking. And we don't stand there and try to pry a bugle out of an elk, more in an acute setting like that in a morning. But day after day, if I'm not hearing bugles within 3 or 4 days, and we just realize, hey, it's not going to work to call in an elk, I would say by the halfway point in the hunt, if we're smart and if we're wanting to kill an elk, we'd better be switching tactics. Good question.
All right. Lorraine Adams, if you call in a bull and things don't go down, do you go back in the next day or move on? How do you circulate your areas but also prevent too much hunting pressure on the elk?
Yeah, so great question. If we go in and call in an elk, but we don't get a shot or we shoot and miss, do we go back in after that elk, or do we move to a new area and let that kind of settle down? And if so, how do we rotate our areas so that we aren't going into one area and really just hammering it? It depends on the area. It depends on the timing of the season. If the elk are more susceptible to getting pushed out of an area because of terrain, because of hunting pressure, because of several different factors, we're probably going to be more likely to go to a new area for the next couple of hunts. If it's a bigger bull, if it's a bull that we luck into and find a big bull or that we're targeting, we might go back into there and spend a little more time. If we have especially in that kind of a situation, if there's a chance that there are other hunters and they're going to come in there, we might, be there 2 hours before daylight, parked at that trailhead the next morning to discourage them from going in there. I think ideally we would have 2 or 3 different areas that we could rotate and hunt and give that area at least 2 days of a break before we went back in there. Elk are fickle, they're gonna get pushed, and if there's too much pressure, it doesn't take too much to push them into a new area or to just make them go quiet for a couple days. So definitely don't want to overdo it, but at the same time, if that bull's fired up and we had a really close encounter, I won't hesitate to go back in there probably the next day. I probably wouldn't do that in the morning and then go back in that same evening if we kind of boogered them in the morning. So at least 24 hours if the bull's fired up. If it's a little bit more pre-rut, something like that, I might give them a couple days before going in there. Again, depending on the situation. I'm seeing quite a few questions over there asking how my calf is doing. So for those of you who are hoping to win the elk hunt with Donnie and I this fall and worried that you might have to be packing me around or that I'm not going to be able to keep up, have no fear. The calf is doing good. I went to, I think, 4 weeks of physical therapy. I've got 2 more weeks left of that. I'm working with a personal trainer and just working on some other muscles that weren't firing and weren't doing their job, which led to overexertion on the calf. And I would say right now on my calf, I'm at 90%. I could go and hunt with a backpack on today if elk season opened today. I'll just say that in 2 months, 2.5 months, when elk season gets here, the elk are going to be in trouble. So Calf's doing good. Thanks for asking. It's healing much faster than anticipated, and with those muscle injuries, are way better than a tendon injury. So I was blessed, and it was a best case scenario for sure. And it's kind of given me a new direction and new exercise to do that'll make me even stronger this fall. All right, Donnie, an elk hunting question. That's kind of an elk hunting question, I guess. But
Jason Hepper says, the runner bull. What are some tips when you have a bull that will bugle back at you but moves away every time? He seems to have a bull that does this every year. He will usually have a few cows.
yeah, so Jason, great question, and it's that bugle and run bull, the runner. And I think before talking about what we can do to prevent that or what we can do to get in on that bull, it's really important to understand why that bull's running. And I've done a there's an article on Elk 101. It's been, gosh, probably 4 years ago, 2016. But if you search on there, I think the title of it was something like "Why Do Elk Bugle and Run?" But in that, I break down. I think there were four different things that I broke down and talked about reasons why a bull elk will bugle and run. So a couple common ones are a younger bull that's not a herd bull, but is with the herd and is thinking he's a herd bull. He knows that if a herd bull comes in there, if a mature bull comes in there, he doesn't have a chance. And the cows are going to leave him if the herd bull doesn't come in and beat him up. So he's timid. He doesn't want to fight. He wants to keep pushing the cows, hoping that he can get away from this bull that's pretty aggressive behind him, which is you, the hunter. And he doesn't want to take a chance coming in. Another one is, if you're hunting an area that there's a lot of hunting pressure and the elk have just continually heard bugle after bugle, they've smelled humans every day, they're just wary and they're going to distance themselves from that. They aren't going to take a chance. They know there's danger in the area and they're just not going to be as likely to come in. Those bulls probably aren't going to be as loud and as vocal either, but they'll still bugle a lot of times and just be a lot more timid, understanding that, hey, if I go in there, I've smelled humans every day, I've been bumped several times, there's people everywhere here, I'm just not going to take a chance. And so that's another reason. Another probably more common reason that most of us struggle with is that big mature herd bull who has a herd of cows, he's established his harem, and he's got a cow that's in estrus and ready to be bred. His focus is on that cow. And so he's still going to be very aggressive, very vocal, but he's probably not even going to really engage in a conversation with you. He's not even going to turn around and come at all. He's focused on that cow. And so now, as far as tactics for each of those, that younger bull that's got cows that doesn't want to lose them, you're not going to probably be able to just scream aggressive bugle after aggressive bugle and close that distance on him. So, he's got cows, he's interested in cows, maybe some subtle cow calls as you move in. If you hang up and give him some really desperate cow calls that plead to that emotion of wanting to breed, that bull might come back. But typically, on any of these situations, your best thing to do is going to be to work in using whatever calling strategy will work for that situation, but also having that caller back behind you so that you, as the shooter, can slip in 20, 40, 60 yards, whatever it is, keep moving in, closing that distance, and then wait for that bull to make a mistake, either to come back to stand his ground, to come back to look for that cow, to come back chasing a cow in estrus, whatever it might be. Those bulls that bugle and run, your best chance is going to be going in stealthy as a shooter, having that collar back behind, keeping that bull interested in what he wants to hear. Now, I will say with a mature bull, a herd bull that has cows, and he's got a cow that's in estrus, and he's following her. The cows are making their way back up the mountain to their bedding area. You've got this bull that does not want to take a chance of leaving the cows and coming back down to you. A, because his cows are going to move off and maybe get intercepted by another bull. B, because if he comes down and loses a fight, then you go up there and take over his cows. So you've got a couple reasons not to. But if you can put enough pressure on that bull, which you've probably got to get inside 100 yards of a herd bull that has a cow in estrus, you've got to get in tight and you've got to challenge him. And you've got to make him know that, hey, I'm pushing, I want this cow, I'm willing to fight for it. You get in close. When he responds, you hammer him with that challenge, but you've got to be close. He's not going to come very far And when he does come, it's going to be fast. So it's worked for us. Even that last week of September, you've got fall equinox, you've got cows in estrus, you've got all the elk are herded up. The bulls are really focused on breeding. You can still call in those herd bulls, but it's going to take a lot more work. It's going to take more pressure. It's going to be very dynamic. You're going to have to be running behind that herd up the mountain, keeping up with them. You have to put that pressure on that bull and then get inside that magic window to make it happen. So that's it in a nutshell. Like I said, there's a lot more detail in that article if you can find it on Elk 101. I think the title was Why Do Bulls Bugle and Run, if I'm remembering correctly.
All right, I'm going to hammer this name, but John Van Lieshout says, besides your weapon and boots, what is the most important piece of gear a new elk hunter needs?
So excellent question. And I love to answer this question because the top of the list, the undeniable, unarguable piece of gear that every elk hunter needs, and sometimes I think especially new elk hunters overlook it, that number one piece of gear is you. And you might be laughing, going, no, seriously. But seriously, you are the most important thing that you will take into the elk woods. And so many of us spend way too much money on a new bow, on backpacks, on boots, on all of these things that we think are going to make us successful. And we forget to invest in ourselves. And so you putting in time learning about elk, you putting in time getting in good shape, you putting in time being the very best you can be with the weapon you have, those are going to do far more for you than a new bow, which, a new bow is great, and bows have come a long way and they continue to advance each year. So they definitely contribute to success, but the most important piece of gear that you have, you already have. And for a new elk hunter, I can't stress it enough. Invest in yourself. Make sure physically you're in good shape. Invest in learning as much as you can about elk and elk hunting. Invest in that first. The gear will make you better, but that foundation is so important. So that's my answer to a number one piece of gear.
All right. Wade Stewart asked, you waited on Donnie's bull during midday madness last year. I'm assuming for thermals. What other reasons would cause you to pause? How do you know when to be aggressive or sit?
So Wade, great question. And when it comes to that midday, actually any time of the day, you have to understand when those thermals are going to change and be ready to back out, be ready to circle around, even not even be ready, but sometimes we look at it and say that bull's moving up the mountain. We've only got a half hour of good thermals here. Why don't we just jump over on the next ridge, go up the mountain a mile and engage with him up there once the wind switches. So on Donnie's hunt last year, it was opening day, so August 30th here in Idaho. It's warm, so the thermals are switching early in the morning. You get that switch at 7:30 sometimes right at daylight. The thermals are already coming up the mountain. And that day was no different. They switched early. We were in a good setup. We were in a ravine. The bull was on one side, we were on the other. So he had to come down and come up to us. So with the thermals coming up, we were good. He came in once and there was a little rock bluff below us, so he couldn't get up to us to come all the way in. And once he went back across, it's really hard to call them back across the ravine twice. So he's on the other side now. So we really had to kind of wait for him to move up onto the main ridge. We circled around, got up ahead of him on the main ridge, and he bugled from kind of out across from us. And we weren't sure if he was going up farther to bed or if he was going to bed down there. So rather than take a chance of circling around and ending up below him and having him smell us, or going straight out to him and having him be above us and smell us, we decided to lay back, wait for the thermals to change, and then know that we could get below him wherever he was and hope for a good evening hunt. And fortunately, it worked out. We actually circled around to where we thought he might have been bedding at the highest point, never got a bugle, and dropped back down an adjacent ridge. We never went over on the ridge that we knew he was on. We stayed on an adjacent ridge, and it worked great because we got over about his level. He answered down in the draw from us, and it allowed us to really work around and play those thermals. So super important to know the thermals, to know what it's doing then, know what it's doing in a half hour, know what it's doing in 4 hours, and make your decision based on the thermals, which is what we did. I usually don't get too aggressive with thermals unless there's a really good reason to. And I can't think off the top of my mind what a good reason to get aggressive with thermals or to take a chance. If we're in an area where the winds are kind of swirling, sometimes we'll say, hey, down in the draw, it's going to be a little better. Let's drop down in there, taking a chance on those swirling winds. Sometimes, if we got a bull that's really fired up and we know we've only got 15 or 20 minutes before the thermals switch, we might take a chance and push in there and hope to get it done really quick. But most of the time, we're going to obey the thermals and the wind and not push it too much on that side of the envelope.
All right, I had quite a few questions asking what is your bow setup this year and what arrows are you shooting this year?
Yeah, so great question. I had a chance last fall before they came out to shoot the Prime Black 5, and I absolutely loved it. And so I'm shooting the same bow I shot last fall. I'll be shooting it as of right now. I haven't actually seen anything new from Prime yet this summer, so not sure if I'll have an opportunity. That's my first opportunity to ever shoot a bow before it actually came out. I don't know if that'll work out again. If it doesn't, I will not be the least bit disappointed because that Black series from Prime is incredible. So that's my setup. I've got the HHA optimizer sight on it with the HHA Virtus Rest. Love both of those. I'm shooting the crossover stabilizer, which if you've watched any of our hunts, you know what that is, and can't say enough good things about that stabilizer. The arrow, I've been shooting the Black Eagle Spartan 300 spine arrow for 4 years now, and again have no reason to switch from that. I do put a 30 grain brass weight on the back of the insert on those arrows, so it gives me a lot more FOC. I think I'm up around 14% with my setup with the 350s. When I was shooting the 350 spine arrows, they're a little lighter, so you put that weight on the front, and I think I was up around 16% on the FOC. The 300 spine's a little heavier, so it distributes that weight back towards the center a little more. So I think I'm at 14% with that brass weight. Shooting the G5 broadhead, I shot the Striker V2 last year. Loved it. Love the Strikers. They're just super sharp. They do have the new Montec this year, as well as the new Striker X, which is the 4-blade. I've got both of those that I've been shooting a little bit, and it's really going to come down to which one I have the most confidence in. But so far, I know all of them are sharp. All of them will kill an elk. All of them fly good. By the end of the summer, I'll know which one flies the best for me and my setup. So I think that's my bow setup. Tight spot quiver, 5-arrow quiver on it. Am I forgetting anything, Donnie, on the bow?
No, that sounds about it.
That's it. Release. Can't forget a release. Donnie's forgot a release before, but we won't go there.
um, Zachary Lenning asks, what are the feeding patterns of elk? Feed in the morning and bed midday? Is there a specific vegetation that you look for to indicate elk presence?
So when I'm actually in the field hunting, I'm not looking necessarily for specific vegetation. I hope by that point I've kind of figured out where the elk are moving to, lower elevation where they feed and water and bed at night, up to the typical higher elevation where the thermals are good, where they're protected during the middle of the day. So I'm not as worried about finding the feed source in September. I'm worried about finding the elk, and I use my bugle to do that. So when it gets to post-rut and late season, that's when the feed sources become more important. And again, we talked last week, we had a live Q&A with the University of Elk Hunting members, and talking about specific vegetation, specific feed. And it's so different even within the states. If you're at uh, 7,500 feet in central Idaho, they're going to be feeding on something completely different than they are even 2 hours away at 3,500 feet or at 5,000 feet. And so I don't have a lot of knowledge just basically because I haven't made it important to know specifically what they're feeding on. As you get into that later season, though, especially the late season, so November timeframe, feed becomes critical and knowing where they're feeding. And at that point, again, I'm not focused on the specific feed. I'm focused on the sign that tells me the elk are here or the elk are traveling through here. And typically November, you're able to see some of that sign. So I know that's kind of a cop-out answer uh, because I don't know, and I openly admit that I don't know the vegetation, the specific. I can see, that in the winter they're feeding on the willows along the creek bottom. You can see the bite marks and where they've chewed the leaves off of certain shrubs and different things. So I can see they specifically eat on this, but that's not what I'm looking for when I'm in the field hunting. I'm not looking for their feed. I'm looking for them with a bugle tube during the rut. After the rut, I'm looking for tracks. I'm glassing, and what I'm glassing for is on those open hillsides that typically hold the feed. So you get on the north face, and a lot of times there's a lot of brush, a lot of branches, a lot of things. That's not typically going to be the best feed. Best feed is going to have a mix of sunlight, a mix of shade. It's going to get some sun exposure to really get the nutrition, but it's not going to be right out in a wide open, hot, dry hillside. So looking for those open hillsides that I can glass on where the elk are going to come out the first hour of daylight and feed. It might be in a clear cut if there's logging in the area. It might be on the fringe of a burn if there's been a burn in there. So looking more for areas where there are feed rather than that specific feed. So long politician-like answer probably for your question, but hopefully that's helpful.
All right. Um,
Okay, hold on. Before you ask the next question, I think we need another dad joke.
oh my
Ty
goodness.
Stubblefield is here. Ty Stubblefield is in the house. Ty, how's it going? Packing quarters upside down. I don't even know what that means, Ty. All right, Donnie, do you have a dad joke?
Oh, Ty Stubblefield had a question. He said, "Are you a log pooper or a squatter?"
Oh, always one to get right down to the nitty gritty important details. So,
Yeah.
I probably more of a log user.
Yeah.
All right, dad joke. I mentioned dad joke, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of comments. Need another dad joke. Dad jokes.
Well, with season getting closer, the COVID's given me a little bit of extra weight, and so I wanted to go on a diet, but I feel like I have way too much on my plate right now.
All right. So the reason Donnie's using all these bad dad jokes right now is because we're saving the really good ones for Destination Elk V3 that's coming up this fall. So you can look forward to good dad jokes again in Destination Elk, right, Donnie?
As good as they all have been.
All right, time for another elk hunting question.
Where was this one?
All right, well, you're looking, I've got one here. For every elk you harvest, how many days on average did you actively hunt for it? So I'll answer two questions there. I typically don't target an elk. So most of the elk that I've killed, I've not hunted for that elk. And I'm not saying that was your specific question, but if it was, gosh, I can't think of hardly any elk that I've targeted and went back and hunted specifically for that elk multiple times and finally killed it. With that being said, I think average that we look, and Donnie and I have talked about that before, and I want to say we typically average about 3 days between elk kills. So on a 6-day hunt, we typically will be able to kill 2 elk. And again, that's average. There's some hunts where we go for 8 days, we don't kill anything. Other times we go out and Donnie shoots one opening day. So average though, about 3 to 3.5 days of hunting per kill for Donnie and I. Donnie, is that right? I remember we talked about that last fall.
That's pretty close.
So we plan a 7 or 8 day hunt, hoping that 2 of us can fill a tag on that hunt. And for the most part, outside of our Roosevelt elk experience, that is still a large chip on our shoulder, we've been able to fill those 2 tags on most of the hunts. So. All right, got a question ready?
This one involves after the kill. Matthew Warner says, how cool does it need to be at night to keep the meat from going bad?
Great question. And there's a lot of things that sometimes we don't think about before we're successful, that are really important post success. You know, how quickly does the meat spoil? What do you need to do to be able to pack it out so that it doesn't spoil? You know, all of these different things. But that question specifically, how cool does it need to be at night so the meat will stay good? It's amazing how the meat will actually keep really good in really warm weather if you do a couple of things. First thing that's most important is getting the hide off of the elk as quickly as you can. You know, and when I say that, it's sometimes, you know, you might not find the elk. You might let the elk go for an hour, and then it might take you an hour to find it. By the time you take pictures and get everything ready, you might be approaching 3 hours in warm weather uh, before you actually get the hide off of that elk. The sooner you can get it off, the better, because what that does, that hide is just an insulator, and it insulates the meat, and that meat inside is hot. The bone is just so hot inside there. And with that insulation, the hide on the meat, that meat or the hot air, the heat has nowhere to go. It can't escape. So it stays in there. And if it stays in there too long and too hot without being able to transfer to the outside, that meat can go bad. I've seen meat actually start to go bad within 2 hours. Now, that's with the elk dying fast, literally laying on its side for 2 hours in 85-degree temperature on an open hillside, and then getting to that side that's been down. So if you're in that situation, I always try to roll the elk over and do the side that it's been laying on first, because that's the side that's trapping heat. Between the hide and the ground, it's the side that's insulating the heat the best. So roll it over, then get that hide off quickly. If you can get the hide off quickly, that heat's going to come pouring out of there. And if you've, you know, cold morning, if you've ever opened up an elk or pulled the hide off of it, it'll literally steam right there because of that heat transfer and the differential between the hot meat and the cooler air. So getting the hide off is number one critical. Number two, hang it. If you can hang that from a branch, you know, just get a makeshift meat pole there and hang it. That way the air is able to circulate all the way around the meat. It's able to get that cool air on all sides so that the heat can transfer out. That's important. If it's super hot, if it's middle of the day and you need to take every extreme you can, the last thing I'll do is take a knife and I'll just run it down along the bone, especially on that hind quarter, along that ham. I'll just run a knife along that and open up that entire back ham, all of the meat off of that, and expose that bone. And I can literally dissect each of the pieces of meat, each of the muscle groups off of that, leaving it still on the bone, but opening it up so that bone heat can immediately and directly transfer to the outside air. And sometimes we'll take a stick and put a stick there in that opening, pry those muscle groups open so that that bone stays exposed to the air. If you do all of those things in hot weather, I wouldn't be too worried if it's in the 60s at night. It's plenty cool. The important thing is that first hour, getting the meat cooled that first hour after you get the hide off of it and hang it there. If you can get that process to happen at night, it's going to be cool enough. You know, we always try to find a shady spot. If we can get along a creek where it's going to be cooler in that, you know, in the shade down low along that creek, still hanging it in the air, not putting it in the creek, but just there where the air is cooler. I've never had a problem with losing meat. I've only lost one very small section of meat off of an elk. It was here in Idaho. It was super hot. The elk had laid there for about 2 hours before we found it. The side that we actually lost a little meat on was laying, it's laying on that side, and it was the hind quarter. It was just a small, about a baseball sized section of meat right against the back leg bone. So that's where it's going to happen first. That bone sour is going to happen right there. And if you can open that up, we didn't open it up on that one. And my butcher is the one who enlightened me on that and said, man, just open that up. That heat's going to come out. You're going to be just fine. So great question, and a very important part of a successful elk hunt.
So many comments.
And while Donnie's looking for a question here, thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight. Thanks for being here. This is awesome. I love talking elk, and I think this is better than a seminar for me, because I'm able to sit here in the comforts of my office. I'm able to interact and see the questions that are on your mind and share my experiences and my thoughts on those questions. So thanks for taking time out of your night and being here with us. We're going to try to do these on a regular basis here through the summer and into elk season. And we even talked, if it works, it'd be awesome if we have reception at elk camp during season to do a live Q&A. What are you seeing in the field? We can give you an update on how it's going for us. And technology is an amazing thing. And this whole situation we're in right now, is as difficult as it's been in a lot of aspects, has really given us opportunities to grow and maybe reach outside of our comfort zone, including doing a live Q&A on YouTube Live. So thanks for being here. Donnie, you got a question?
Ryan Beavers asks, how do you play the wind in areas where the breeze overrides the thermals?
Okay, so how do you play the wind if the breeze or the wind overrides the thermals? And so before we get into that, it's important to understand the difference between wind and thermals. And I think, me especially, I always say wind, but what I really typically mean most of the time is the thermals. So in a diurnal system, which is what we have in the mountains, the wind switches twice a day. So di meaning twice, diurnal wind, diurnal thermals. That's almost a tongue twister. Is the wind switches. So as the sun warms up the hillside in the morning, that hot air, cold air pressure differential switches, and now the air starts pulling up as the air gets warm. So throughout the day, it's moving up. In the evenings, the shadow hits, it starts cooling the ground. Again, that temperature differential pulls the air back down, and so you get that switch. So your thermals during the middle of the day are going up. In the evening, through the night, and in the morning, the thermals are coming down. But there are exceptions to that. And we noticed it especially on the Oregon coast hunting Roosevelt elk. There are ocean winds. And those winds will come in. Sometimes they'll be coming up the mountain at 15 miles an hour in the morning when it's cold, and the thermals should be going down. And so we do have to play that. Our plan is to attack from the bottom in the morning because the thermals are good, but we get out in the morning and realize there's a wind coming from the bottom. We have to play our approach differently. In the mountains, if middle of the day you get it's really warm out, but then you get complete cloud cover during the middle of the day, it's going to drop the temperature. And when it does that, it's going to cool the ground. And sometimes you'll get those competing winds swirling. So you'll get swirling wind. Sometimes you'll even get kind of a weird dominant wind going through there. Pressure systems, as they move into an area ahead of a storm or after a storm, can push a prominent wind through an area. So, you've got thermals that we're typically concerned with obeying, but then you'll also get a wrench thrown in there every once in a while of a swirling wind or a prevailing wind, or along the ocean, those ocean breezes coming in. And, you really have to, the nice thing about it, other than those swirling winds, most of the time they're fairly consistent. A thermal's very consistent during the middle of the day. Once you get into that transition time, it can get to where it swirls a bit. But a prevalent wind is typically fairly consistent. The wind coming in off of the ocean, we found, has been fairly consistent. And so you just have to play it the same as you would a thermal. You want to always approach an area that the elk are going to be using it the same way. They're going to be using those winds to their advantage. So you want to approach not walking with it at your back. You want to, if you get a bull to bugle, you want to be aware of what that wind's doing outside of a normal thermal. So we play it the same as a thermal, just recognizing it's not going to be what we're used to, which is thermals coming down in the morning and going up during the middle of the day. It might be going across the side. It might be coming up first thing in the morning, but our approach is still going to be predicated on what that wind is doing. So, great question.
All right. Christopher Meyer, tactics in wolf country. Do you change them?
So, just was that tactics in wolf country? Do we change tactics?
Yes.
Yeah. So, wolf country, if you've not had the displeasure of hunting elk in wolf country, it does change things. And, my top three favorite elk hunting areas are in wolf country, outside of, Arizona or something like that, which would be on my top if I could get tags for it regularly. But, over the counter in Idaho, over the counter general tag in Wyoming, general tag in Montana. Those are all heavy wolf areas where we hunt. And we do have to change our tactics a little bit. And it's not so much the change of tactics. We just have to understand that the elk have changed their habits a little. And the way that we find them, it's going to be harder to find them. They're way more mobile now. The wolves have them continually moving rather than hanging out in one pocket for a month. They hang out in that pocket for a month, bugling their heads off. The wolves hear them, they move in, and they hunt them. And if the elk don't adjust to that, they're all going to get killed. So they've learned to adjust. If the wolves come in there, the elk move out. And a lot of times now, the elk are just moving in this circuit, continually on the move, which makes it harder for the wolves to find them and hunt them. So the elk are on the move. Takes a lot more of us being mobile, a lot more of us on the move to cross paths with the elk. Once we do find them, there's no guarantee they're going to be in there the next day. So that makes it more difficult. So we do have to have backup areas. We have to think, where are the elk going to get away from the wolves? The other thing, they're a lot less vocal. So there will be elk in the pocket we're in that might not answer our calls. And I always say, if an elk doesn't answer my call, I'm going to walk right by him and go find an elk that will answer the call. But in wolf country, sometimes none of the elk in that area will answer the call. So you have to change your tactics a little bit in that sense. I still have found that if you get in close to the elk and aren't as loud and as aggressive with your calling, the elk will answer back. So we're talking, just a growl. We're talking chuckles, which are softer, quieter, don't broadcast as far. We probably aren't going to hear as much, elk just sitting over on a hillside screaming his head off every 60 seconds during the peak rut, which in an area that doesn't have wolves, it might not be uncommon for a bull to sit there and bugle over and over and over if he's got a cow in estrus. Get in wolf country, and a lot of times those bulls will just follow along glunking. That's all you'll hear. And when they get aggressive, it's not a loud challenge bugle. Now it's just a low, aggressive growl. So it does change how we hunt the elk. But once I get in close with them, my strategy stays the same. I'm trying to start a fight with that elk. I'll get more aggressive with the calls once I get close in. He might not get as aggressive. In fact, I've had bulls come in, almost it seemed like they were coming in to tell me to shut up because we're in wolf country and here I am being loud. So a lot of times they'll get aggressive. They'll come marching in there quietly to tell me to be quiet. With that being said, there's times like in Wyoming, there's areas in Wyoming where there are huge packs of wolves where the elk are still very vocal. And I don't know the difference. It's got to be a demographic thing, a bull to cow ratio, where the bull to cow ratio is higher than it is here in Idaho or Montana where we hunt. Because in Idaho and Montana, there's no doubt it affects the elk vocalization and their habits. Wyoming, I haven't seen it as much in wolf country. And I don't know for sure. The only thing I can attribute it to is we're hunting areas where there are more bulls and fewer cows. And I don't know if that's the factor there. But if you hunt an area where there are no wolves or even grizzly bears will affect not as much the vocalization, but just the overall behavior of the elk. If you hunt areas outside of that, be grateful because those elk are easier to hunt. Not saying they're easy to hunt, but they're easier than a elk apples to apples in wolf country. So long explanation on that, but hopefully that answered that question. And for those that are looking at hunting in wolf country for the first time, maybe this season, hopefully that sheds some light and a little bit of direction on how to approach that.
All right, I just seen one here. It says, I've been listening for 45 minutes and I'm still waiting for the grouse information.
That comes tomorrow night on Randy's Wapiti Wednesday live Q&A. So I'm pretty sure that Randy's Elk Talk Live on Wednesday night probably covers grouse hunting information. And I'm an inexperienced enough grouse hunter that I don't feel comfortable providing a lot of information on grouse hunting. I would absolutely defer to Randy because if you followed along on that hunt, the first time I hunted with Randy in Montana, it literally, we would have a bull bugling down in a draw and we'd be slipping in there, getting the wind good, getting into a good setup. And I'd look and here's Randy 30 yards ahead of me off to the side, slipping along with his, arrow knock. I'm thinking, what is he doing? And pretty soon he comes to full draw and he shoots. And I'd like to say he shoots a grouse, but there were a lot of grouse shot at on that trip. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, grouse, grouse. I'm like, elk, elk. But Randy definitely, it's hard to pull him away. Even a bugling bull doesn't pull him away from a grouse. And as I've got to know him over the last few years, knowing him a little better, his wife is very particular about the fact that he brings grouse home. And if he went home and told a story to his wife that, hey, there was a bull bugling down the hill and we walked right by a grouse, he may get in trouble on the home front. So I can see, he's trying to balance that, but no doubt Randy is a I'd like to say grouse killing machine, but he is a grouse hunting machine. So tune into his Elk Talk Live over on his YouTube live channel tomorrow night. I don't remember if it's 6 or 7 o'clock Mountain Time, but he wealth of knowledge over there, especially on that grouse side.
I think that this person was tuning in tonight to see if he could get information to tell people tomorrow on his own podcast. Randy is here.
Oh, Randy. Okay, well, you're looking at, I've got another one here on diaphragm elk calls. Ryan Duffy asked, I bought several different Rocky Mountain hunting calls, trying to find the right one. Do you ever recommend trimming the tape? I noticed creases and folds in mine, I think causing me to lose air. So what Ryan's talking about there is this outside, the orange part is the tape. This is the latex. You never want to cut the latex. Don't ever do anything with the latex. But on the tape, I've seen people take it and trim, especially on the edges a little bit, so it'll fit in a narrower palette a little better. I don't recommend it. In fact, even when my kiddos were 7, 8 years old, when I started them on diaphragms, I didn't trim the tape, even for their smaller mouths. And the reason why is this tape is what actually seals at the top of your mouth and the roof of your mouth. And so what you're trying to do is keep air directed down along here so it gets down onto the latex. So this tape actually works as a little bit of a flap, and it actually seals up against the roof of your mouth there. And if it's too big on the sides, you shouldn't lose air out the sides. If you are, trimming it could work, but I would honestly probably suggest moving it around in your mouth to find a different location where it seals a little bit better. And again, you've got the hard frame in there, you've got your teeth, you've got your tongue, you've got the roof of your mouth, all these different factors and features going on there. But one of the most critical parts to being able to get a good sound and control that sound and hold the high note is sealing that air. So you aren't getting air escaping over the back of it and going over the top of the diaphragm, between the diaphragm and the roof of your mouth, and then along the side, you want to seal that. I'd probably use my cheeks more to seal that on the side before I tried cutting the tape. So cutting the tape would be last resort. If it does stick out past your teeth too much, you could cut it, but you'd never want to cut it so that it was sliding up in between your teeth and causing some stability issues there. All right, Donnie, back to you for a question.
This one comes from Brian Uthman.
Hey, Brian.
He says, as aging hunters, what, if anything, are you doing different to prepare for elk season? And have you changed up your tactics and style yet in the field?
So I'm guessing you're just asking that question in general, Brian, because I'm certainly a long ways away from being an aging elk hunter. But I've heard from a friend some things that you could do. Um, no, it changes, and people always said when I was in my 20s, it was always when you turn 30, you're going to notice a difference. You're going to slow down. And I think I skyrocketed into the 30s. And, as I approached 40s, it was always once you turn 40, things are going to change. Your eyesight's going to go bad. You're going to slow down. You're going to get fat. I saw Ty Stubblefield make a comment on Instagram when I hurt my calf. He's like, oh, good, we're going to see Corey get fat now. And I haven't got there yet. So, but with all of that said, there are changes, and it does affect, what I found is it takes more input and more effort on my part to get the same output. And that goes for physical preparation in the off season. During the season, maybe I don't go 14 miles a day for 7 straight days. I start to wear down a little bit sooner. So what I'm doing, obviously with the calf injury, it made me reevaluate a few things. And fortunately, I've got a great team surrounding me that kind of pointed out some of my weak links. And I think addressing those are important. I think, as you hit your mid 40s, you start noticing some of those weak links coming to the surface, more knee pain. Well, there's a reason for that knee pain. What is it? In Donnie's case, it's bone on bone, cartilage is wore out. In my case, knee pain is weak hamstrings or weak glute max muscles, which I'm finding out. I pack heavy weight on a pack. I hike up and down the mountain all the time, but I've been doing it wrong. I've been on my tippy toes using my calves as shock absorbers. And, my calf muscles are strong, but they're also tight because my hamstrings are tight. So I think, stretching is super important. I talked to Tony Mudd, who's a good friend of mine. Tony's, I think, 57 or 58 and can probably out hike, out lift, out pull up, out anything physical. Anybody tuning in, including myself or anybody else, probably just an absolute beast when it comes to physical conditioning. But when I was talking to him a few months ago, he was talking about the importance of stretching. Uh, and so stretching is important. Working the right muscles. I think a lot of times in our 20s and 30s, we go to the gym and we do bench press, we do squats, we do deadlift, some of those things. And we might be overlooking some of the really important muscles that might not be firing during those exercises. So I'm definitely, as I work through this, I'm not in a position to give advice on it yet. But as I work through this and working with a physical therapist and a trainer, I'm definitely going to be sharing some of those things that I found. One of the basic things, I couldn't get my hamstrings to fire on purpose. I was using my quads just to hold my legs against the wall at a 90-degree angle. And instead of pulling down with my hamstrings, I was pushing in with my quads and trying to use my heels to dig with my quads, which is completely wrong, which caused some of my problems because I wasn't walking the right way with the right muscles. So long answer, probably went down a couple rabbit holes there, but Brian, to answer your question, and again, I'm just relaying information from a friend because I'm not an aging elk hunter yet. But yeah, I think stretching is important. Doing the right exercises is important. I don't think that heavy lifting is important anymore, and I think might make us a little more prone to injury if we're trying to stack a couple 45s on a bar and just bench press. If we're trying to, squat a whole bunch of weight. Uh, I think that there's some smarter exercises we can do, and again, like anything, I think just having that backpack on, being in the mountains, and experiencing what we're going to experience in September is great training.
All right, I've had a few people. Nate Adams says, what about using decoys?
Yeah, so decoys, and real quick before we go to that, I see Ty mentioned foam rolling. Foam rolling is definitely a part of my regimen, especially if you have a tight muscle. I should have done it, and I knew I should have done it. My calf was sore for a week and a half before I injured it. I woke up that morning and actually thought about using the foam roller on it. Instead, I opted for stretching my hamstrings, which did not stretch the gastroc muscle, which is the one that ruptured. Had I used a foam roller on it, I think it would have no doubt uh, probably prevented the injury. So, Ty, great point there. All right, back to the current question, which is decoys. I've seen a couple other questions come through um, on decoys for a solo hunter. A couple other decoy related questions. So I'll give you my take on decoys in a nutshell. Decoys work, there's no doubt, but decoys also don't work. So it's kind of a 50-50 thing. And I've always approached it as I'll use a decoy. And I used to say as a last resort. That almost sounds desperate, but I'll use a decoy if I've tried all of the normal things that usually work to bring a bull in and he's not coming in, then I'll use a decoy. And the reason I say that, there are times when a bull might come in to calling, to raking. He's just hung up. He's looking for something or he's not quite comfortable. So I don't want to just go and throw a decoy up if the decoy is going to scare him off. And I say if because I don't know what it is that scares an elk off with a decoy versus brings it in. We've been in two exact same setups, exact same behavior from the elk. One time we hold up a decoy, he comes running in. The next time we hold it up, he turns and runs off. And same decoy, same approach, tactic from our side. There's just sometimes that they want a visual, and when they get a visual, it makes them comfortable enough to say, I'm okay going in a little closer." And there are other times when they get that visual that, for whatever reason, I don't know if they see a glare. I don't know if they can tell it's 2D instead of 3D. We've had them walk into 10 yards or less from a decoy and still think it's a real elk. So I don't see the correlation or what the difference is. I've come to just recognize or realize sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So if I'm in a setup and I'm calling, 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 and the bull's I can tell he wants to see something. He's hung up out there at 100 yards. I'll flash a decoy at him. And I think that's the important key to using a decoy is not holding it up and just standing there holding it in the wide open. I've not had that work very often, but if you get in broken timber where, an elk, you can hold it out there and if he sees just the head of the decoy, it's enough for him to say, okay, there is an elk there where the sound's coming from. Two of my three senses are good right now. I'm going to approach a little bit closer. But if he can see that decoy the whole time he's coming in, he might only come 10 more yards and stop. So we're either in really broken timber where we can hold the decoy up, he can get a glimpse of it, and then as he walks in, he can't see it anymore. So he's got to come to another vantage point before he can see it. We'll flash it up a little bit and then drop it down. The last thing I want to do is be out in the open and hold a static decoy for him because I just haven't had good luck. A lot of times they'll circle around and then we're kind of pinned down. We can't move. He gets around, gets our wind, and it's a no go. So I don't rely on decoys. We have a decoy on our backpack most of the time, but like Roosevelt elk hunting in Oregon, they're worthless there because it's so thick that by the time the elk can see the decoy, you should be able to get a shot at the elk. If I'm hunting a place like New Mexico, Arizona, where it's really open, I'm gonna probably not rely on them as much. Get into the Wyoming, the Montana, the Idaho, where you've got some broken timber, some open terrain with good timber, a little bit more use of a decoy there.
All right. Ryan Beavers says, do you ever not pursue a bull because of how many miles elevation it would be to pack it out? I want to know this answer.
Donnie's still trying to find out where that limitation is, but we don't, and we've beat ourselves up before having to get an elk out of a big hole a long distance. I don't even remember what our farthest pack is. I know we had one in Wyoming that was 5.5 miles one time. Oregon, that Oregon Bowl probably had to be 4 to 5 miles, and it was heavy. It was just the two of us packing that one. Um, I probably tried to forget about some of the more brutal ones, but we don't. If we have a bull bugling or we see an area that's good, we don't stop to consider how far in are we going, how are we going to get the elk out. Fortunately, we're still in good enough physical condition that we're able to get an elk out of some of those areas. It is, we are starting to look at other options, hunting off of a motorcycle where there's motorized trails. You saw last year on Destination Elk, we used the Baku e-bikes for 3 of the elk to pack out all 3 of my children. The elk that they shot, their elk were packed out. That was more just a function of closed logging roads and be able to get back in on that with the bikes. But man, putting a whole elk on a trailer and riding it out on an e-bike, that opened my eyes to another method of packing. Donnie's bull in Montana last year, we packed it out with Bo Beatty's llamas and Bo's at Wilderness Ridge, I think, llamas.
Yep.
So great option there. But no, we don't have a limitation on how far in we go. We're just starting to get creative on how we might pack them out if we find ourselves in there. The area we're scouting in Idaho this year is going to be a prime example of going steep and deep. And we've wanted to hunt these couple of areas for several years and just haven't uh, made the opportunity. And I think this year we're going to do it. So we're looking at possibly using llamas. We're looking at using motorcycles to get back in away from people and then hiking from there. But once we get an elk on the ground, we'll figure out the best way to pack it out. But so far, we haven't limited ourselves yet. Sorry, Donnie. not the answer Donnie was hoping to hear tonight.
I just know that there's a lot of places that we've been to. I'm glad we didn't shoot an elk.
That is a very true statement there. So, really quickly here, it is 7:15 Mountain Time. You've been here with me for an hour and 15 minutes. I am very respectful of everybody's time. I know we could all sit here and probably talk elk hunting for several hours. So let's start winding down a little bit. It's 7:16 on my computer clock. Let's say about 8 or 9 more minutes. So probably enough time for 4 or 5 more questions. And then we'll do a wrap up here, a couple of reminders, and a little giveaway. So, Donnie, you got a question?
Jeremy Clark asks, does rain make an elk hunker down and not talk or move? This last season, he had a bull bugling in the morning, and once rain and fog came in, the cows shut up and the bull. Any advice when hunting in the rain?
So hunting in the rain, yeah, that's always a challenge for a lot of reasons. Real quickly though, just saw a comment here. I wanted to give a shout out to 10-year-old Caleb Bayer. Caleb, good to see you. And then also saw one more here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Sorry. Rumor has it you're flying Top Gun jets to scout. No, Joe, we're no Top Gun jets for us for scouting yet. We did talk about going shed hunting by helicopter last year, but didn't end up doing that. Total archery challenges. Yes, we're going to try to make it at least to Big Sky if those are still happening in July. Possibly Park City in Utah and Northwest Mountain Challenge here at Tamarack, which is just 5 miles from me where I'm sitting right here. We're going to be there this weekend, at least Friday night. There's an elk calling contest and probably be there Saturday as well. So anybody going to Northwest Mountain Challenge at Tamarack, hope to see you there Friday night. Total Archery Challenge in Big Sky, that'll be the priority. So if I make it to only one, I'll be at that one. If I'm able to make it to both of them, I'll be at Park City also. So back to the question on rain. So elk do hunker down in the rain most of the time. You get that peak rut, and if it rains for 2 or 3 days, those bulls are still going to rut. They're going to be less vocal probably. You're not going to be able to hear as well. But for the most part, elk do. They're like us. It starts pouring rain. We pull on a rain jacket and sit out under a tree, hope it passes in a couple hours. If it rains all day, it might be a good day to head into town and do some laundry, make a phone call, grab a milkshake and a cheeseburger, because the elk do. They'll hunker down. They aren't moving, so they're going to be harder to find. If it's September and you're relying on a bugle, it's going to be harder to hear the bugles. A lot of times that noise from the rain, the wind from the rain, all of that just makes it harder to hear elk. And also, it makes it harder for the elk to hear danger. So they're going to hunker down someplace. It might be on an open ridge and some open timber where they can use their eyes because their ears aren't working as good. In the rain, it kills scent. So you're going to have that scent cone instead of fanning out down the mountain. It might just kind of taper down a little bit and not the scent's not going to be as strong. So an elk's senses are going to be limited, which means they're going to limit their movements and they're not going to take a chance with danger, putting themselves in a situation where their senses aren't able to keep them alive. So those days you do have to cover a lot more country, which isn't as fun when it's raining. If it's just, we're looking at the weather and we see there's a storm coming in Thursday night, it's going to rain, but it breaks up at midnight or by the next morning it lets up. We might take the evening off and, like I said, just run into town, grab a bite to eat, rest, hunker down. I'm a big proponent of you can't kill an elk from camp, or you can't kill an elk if you aren't out there with them. I don't like to miss a minute in the field during elk season, but there's sometimes when, if we do need a little break and need a rest, looking at the weather, that's probably the time to do it. So least effective time to hunt is in the wind and the rain.
All right, there's been quite a few questions about first-time hunters, or it's their first year. So Wade Ross, his question was, any advice on mentoring a new hunter? He has two first-time archery hunters going with me this year. One is a buddy and the other is his youth stepson.
Okay. So new hunters, especially when we're talking youth, and I'll break these up into two categories. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to mentor and teach and hunt with all three of my children. And I've watched them progress and continue to progress and still have a need to progress, as we all do. But the thing I found, I'm really high geared. I'm really pushed and motivated and driven by success. And so for me, that's always been kind of the gauge. I love hunting. Don't get me wrong. That there's successes every day, but at the end of the hunt, there's a lot of disappointment if an elk isn't killed. And I still, even after hunting for 35 years, that still drives me, and that's still a big, I guess, measuring stick for the overall success of the hunt. And so when I started hunting with a 10-year-old child, wanting to push as hard as I could, and Donnie will attest to it. I push Donnie. A lot of times it's just a natural shove toward what we need to do to be successful, rather than just sitting back and saying, maybe Donnie's enjoying this minute, and I'm going to let him just sit there, even though he's not going to get a shot where he's at. I'll go up there and say, you've got to get up to that tree. You've got to get there fast. Go, go, go. And trying to do everything we can to make that hunt successful. When you're hunting with youth, you have to switch gears. And I recognized that, maybe not right away, but you have to make the hunt about them. And that's the most important thing. If they're content and happy stopping and building a fire, when you say, if we build a fire, we aren't going to get a bugle. Or if we build a fire, the elk that might be right up here ahead of us, we aren't going to be able to catch up to them. Or if you want to roll a snowball right now, which I took my youngest son, Sam, it's been 4 or 5 years ago. He was probably 7 or 8. We were rifle hunting in late October. It snowed. And I look back and he's back there literally rolling a snowball on the trail and wanting to build a snowman. So it's a fine balance there between trying to get into animals and have a successful hunt and keep their interest and make it about them, but always make it about them. Those young hunters, you can't push, you can't ruin them. You can't hike up the hill to the point where they're gasping for air and having a terrible time. Yeah, when they get home, I want them to say, that was a hard hike. Dad was making me hike. My lungs were burning. That's okay. But when they sit down and start crying, you've crossed that line. So always keep in mind it's about them. On the other category, if it's, somebody that's in their 20s, it's in great shape, that just has never hunted before, I think it's so important to stop at each point and teach them. Tell them why we're circling around the mountain here because of the thermals. Explain the thermals. Uh, I take a lot for granted that I've learned in 35 years of elk hunting that it's been good to do the online course made me stop and think about what I do, why I do it in every phase of the hunt. And I think breaking it down to a new hunter is so important so that they can follow along and they can see what you're doing, but they might not understand it. They might not understand why you approach a certain way. They might not understand why you stop and call here. They might not understand why you drove past this trailhead and went to the next one. So I think just being open to over explain everything is really important. And hats off to anybody that's willing to take somebody under their wing. And whether it's a 50-year-old first time hunter, whether it's you and a buddy that you just want somebody to go with you so you have company on the hunt, have a hunting partner, and you're teaching them as you learn. Whether it's you taking your own children out, and I would strongly encourage, don't wait until they're 12 to take them out hunting for the first time. Find a way to integrate them into what you're doing. Be with them out in the outdoors. And lastly, and probably most importantly, are those who take the youth who might not have a parent who hunts or who might need an adult mentor. As we're approaching Father's Day, probably no better time than to just pat you on the back and say thank you for being a mentor. Even if you aren't the biological dad there, you're being a mentor and helping those youth out. So thanks for doing that. Donnie, maybe two more questions.
All right. This one will be fairly simple. Andrew Moon asks, will there ever be an audiobook version of the course that I can listen to while driving?
Yes. What was the name on that? Was it Andrew?
Andrew Moon.
Andrew Moon. So, Andrew, if you are a current member of the University of Elk Hunting online course, we have had the audiobook out for a little over a year. So, yes, the entire course except for the new module on Roosevelt hunting and the new module on hunting cow elk, the audio version has not been made available for those yet. Every other word, all 210,000 words or whatever it is in the online course, is available in audiobook form. On the web version, on each page, right under the header of each page, there is an audio bar that you can listen to it. And in the app version, I don't know if I can pull it up here. If we can see it, I might lose Donnie. And if I do, I'll get back to him. But in the app version, when you go into the app, and if this takes a little bit to pull up, I'll just forego it. All right, so here we are in the app. Got all the different modules here. Within each module, if you go into module 2, scouting for elk, you've got the 4 chapters listed there: the introduction, the resources for scouting, scouting with Google Earth, and then boots on the ground. And you may not be able to see that because of the lighting. I just realized there, that a little better maybe. There, the lighting. If we click on so I'm going to go back and show you the modules here. So there's the different modules in the course. Within the module 2, scouting, if we go into scouting with Google Earth, when it pops up right up here on top, this is your audiobook version. And if you push play, I don't know if it'll work. I'm on the phone with Donnie, but push play there. That works if you have a connection, so Wi-Fi or a cell connection, but you can also download. So you just hit that download button and it will download it to the app so that you can download all of these. You could download the entire thing, the audiobook, if you wanted. Plug it in your car, wherever you're at. You can listen to it on a plane with headphones. You can connect it by Bluetooth, everything. So the entire course is available by audio book. Let me see if I can go back. Donnie, are you still there? Donnie, are you there? Oh, he's there. Excellent. So I didn't even lose Donnie. So, all right. Let's go 2 more questions because that one wasn't really elk related. 2 more good elk related questions.
Andrew AHO, how do you e-scout from out of state on Onyx when they don't update the physical maps?
So how do I e-scout from out of state on OnX maps when they don't update the physical maps? So OnX does a pretty good job of updating their maps. I'll get notifications at least a couple times a year that different maps need to be updated. So a lot of the features do get updated. With that being said, there are some things, even with like Google Earth, there might be a burn through an area, but it doesn't get updated for 2 or 3 years on Google Earth before that burn actually shows up. So there's a little bit of that you have to recognize. I do most of my e-scouting with Google Earth and not OnX. OnX is incredibly powerful, and having that mobile app in my hand in the field is a huge advantage. But most of my e-scouting, I use GoHunt and Google Earth are the two resources I probably rely on most. Once I kind of pin down the areas that I'm wanting to hunt, I'll transfer waypoints to OnX, to my mobile app. But as far as e-scouting from the desk, Google Earth is what I'm using. And I just look at the imagery date. You can see the date. You can actually change to different maps on Google Earth and should be able to get a pretty good idea. They've come a long way. The resolution on the maps is better. The updates on the maps is becoming more and more current. There's some awesome stuff coming out in the very near future that's going to make e-scouting even better, which I'm super excited for, and we can definitely talk about in a future Q&A, hopefully here in the next couple of weeks. But as far as how do you do it with the maps not updating? From what I've found, the features that I need and that I rely on are updated frequently enough, and I haven't had an issue where something wasn't updated or wasn't accurate once I got in the field. All right, last question. Before we get to the last question, I'll just run through everything here really quickly. We're giving away 2 prime bows. If you're watching tonight, go to elk101.com/dad for Father's Day. Just a form, fill in your name, email address, hit submit, and you are entered to win those 2 bows. Additionally, the gear, the elk calls, the Elk 101 hats, got the 2 new hats. We've got this, which I'm probably going to have people lined up outside my office door that drove here hoping to kidnap me and steal the bugleberry, but got the bugleberry. All you got to do is just go to that site or that page, elk101.com/dad, fill it out, and you're automatically entered to win all of that. So the prizes from tonight, as well as the 2 bows, both of those bows will be given away to one person. It's a father youth type of a setup. So we've got an adult bow, the Prime Synergy, and then Prime also manufactures the Quest line of bows. So it's a Quest Thrive, which is a phenomenal youth bow. It's the same bow that my daughter shot her elk with last year. So we'll give that package away. Northwest Mountain Challenge at Tamarack this weekend. Friday night's the calling contest. Anybody that's there, definitely swing by and say hi. With the whole COVID thing, I don't know if I would say shake hands, but maybe a elbow bump or something. The elk hunt giveaway with Mountain Ops, go to elk101.com/hunt, sign up for that. If you're interested in signing up for the online course, anyone who signs up or renews this week between today and Friday, if you use the promo code CROSS20, we are giving away a SIG Cross rifle topped with a Vortex rifle scope this week. So sign up this week or renew and you'll be automatically entered for that. I think that's it. So last question. Before we do, thank you again for being here. We're going to do this again. So online course members, next Tuesday we'll be doing a live Q&A, and I'll be sending out information for more of these YouTube live Q&As for everybody to participate in. And Donnie, drum roll, and last question for tonight.
We'll see how much we've learned here.
Uh-oh.
Braden Miller says, as an Oregon resident and new elk hunter, he's feeling overwhelmed about hunting Roosevelt elk. He's narrowed it down to a unit. What do you recommend as the next best steps for locating and then hunting?
All right, so Braden, a couple things stood out there. First off, you're an Oregon resident, so don't be overwhelmed by the fact that you shouldn't get a note left on your truck. We, being non-residents, that's definitely something we contended with. Evidently, the residents there don't like non-residents as much, but we've resolved that, and hopefully, you won't experience that. You've narrowed it down to a unit, which is a huge step in Oregon Roosevelt country, because literally that whole coastal range, I think, is good Roosevelt hunting. And we've been fortunate to hunt, I think, 4 different areas now, very different, like geographically separated by many miles, and we found elk in all of it. The thing that I've realized is Roosevelt elk are not concentrated, especially on that coastal side. If you find a pocket of elk, you might go a long ways to find the next pocket. So scouting is very important. I would say, like always, find the cows. This time of year, find the cows. Put out a trail camera. Put out several trail cameras in different areas and look for the cows. If the cows are there, they probably aren't going to range too far. The bulls typically don't range too far either, so they're probably close by. In Oregon, if you're comfortable with it, it's totally legal to use bait and salt. So you could use that for your scouting. Put out a bag of salt and put a trail camera on it. It might tell you a little better idea of capturing pictures of the elk and knowing what's in there. The other thing is, if you're out hiking or even driving, but hiking, if you get on a ridge, and keep in mind, Braden, as you probably know, Roosevelt country is thick. For anybody else that's thinking about hunting Roosevelt country, um, I can't even explain how thick it is. But as you're out hiking, look for rubs, for old rubs from last season. And if there are rubs in there from last season, there's a good chance there's going to be a bull back in that exact same area this season. So boots on the ground, I'd be putting out trail cameras, looking for pictures of cows. I would be hiking, looking for rubs from last season. And e-scouting, I've not yet figured out e-scouting for Roosevelt elk. It's just everything looks the same. Everything looks like a north face because it's all lush. They can bed anywhere. They can eat and bed and drink within 100 yards typically. So it is different for e-scouting. With that being said, most of that country holds Roosevelt elk. So if you just get out and spend a few days hiking, you're going to get a good idea of what's in there. You're going to find trails. You're going to get a good idea from trail cameras. And if you find some old rubs, you can be pretty confident bulls are going to be back in that same area this September. So great question. Everybody, thank you. We've still got over 650 people here live with us. The questions just scrolled through. I just watched the chat bar over here rolling through. I know we didn't get to a lot of questions, so with Donnie moderating these, the next Q&A we do, hopefully we can grab some that are not related to the questions we had tonight. Not that we're going to remember all of them, but maybe we can keep an eye out for some topics that didn't get addressed tonight. So definitely come back, join us for the next one. I'll be emailing that out. If you're not on our email list, if you go to elk101.com/dad and sign up for the giveaways, that'll add you to our mailing list and you'll get the emails for future Q&As. We try to send those out. This time of year, I know with our big promotion going on, with the Q&As, with content and everything, you're probably getting more emails from Elk 101 than throughout the rest of the year. I apologize if it's too much. There's a lot going on and we're excited to share it with you. So the promotion, I hate being a marketing person. I hate trying to sell things. This is the one month a year, the month of June, when we have our big promotion for memberships to the online course. So know after this that'll die down quite a bit. Hopefully there's good content mixed in there, things like this, the Q&A, and we've got some new videos coming out. I'll have some new videos here on the YouTube channel. But anyway, that's my apology. I'm not a very good marketer and promoter. I feel guilty every time we send out an email because I don't want to flood your inbox or take advantage of that. But if you are signed up on our newsletter, we'll let you know when the next Q&A is. And thanks again for being here with us. Happy Father's Day. And we'll catch you here on the next one. Donnie, thanks for being here. Do you have a dad joke to leave us with?
Oh my gosh.
On the spot.
Oh, my earlier one was talking about going on a diet, and I've been looking at a bunch of different diets, and I thought about going on an all almond diet, but that's just nuts.
That is nuts. Speaking of food, and I'm starving here. It's after 7:30. I haven't had dinner, but my daughter, my 15-year-old daughter, loves dad. Well, she doesn't love dad jokes. She rolls her eyes at dad jokes, but she came up with one the other night, and she sent me a text and said, "Dad, did you know that a piece of pie costs $3 in the Bahamas?" And I'm like, that is so random. So I texted her back and said something like, "Can you go get me a piece and bring it to me?" And she replied and said, "They're more expensive there than I don't remember what she said. Was it Tahiti or something? They're only $2 in Tahiti." And I replied and said, "That's the most random text I've ever received from you." And she replied and said, "Well, Dad, those are just the pie rates of the Caribbean." So that was a good one. We all had a laugh at that one. But more dad jokes to come on future Q&As. Definitely more to come on Destination Elk V3. Thanks for being here, and we will catch everybody very soon. And we